live with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in beautiful downtown Raleigh. It's Science Tonight. Now here's your host, Chris Smith.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Glad that you could be here. Thanks for joining me this Thursday evening. My name is Chris, and this is Science Tonight. If you're joining me over there in the chat box on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, drop like a waving emoji. Let me know where you're viewing the program from. If this is your first time tuning in to Science Tonight, your umpteenth time. But regardless, I'm glad that you're all here. I know that we've got a great program for you because we've got a fantastic guest who's going to be on tonight's show. Before we get to that, though, I do want to remind everybody that the chat box is open, the comments are open. So as we go through tonight's program, you can leave your questions and your comments about tonight's topic, bringing science and art together. As we go along, I want to know your experiences as we go through the program. And when we get to the Q&A section closer to the end, I'll actually be going back and grabbing your thoughts and questions to pose them to tonight's special guest. Next week on Science Tonight, while we're waiting, as we get started, I'll be bringing on paleontologist Evan Jevnikar. We'll be talking about how the biggest carnivorous dinosaurs got to be so big. So we're talking T-Rex next Thursday night right here on Science Tonight. Share it with all your friends and family. They'll want to be here to learn about dinosaurs too. Now, for tonight, let me bring on our very special guest. Dr. Ariana Eily is a faculty member at the North Carolina School of Science and Math. She got her PhD from Duke University in biology and is the founder and curator of The Art of a Scientist. Dr. Eily, welcome to Science Tonight.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm excited you could be on the program. I've been following you on Twitter now for a while, talking about all the great work that you've done, that you did at Duke University when you were there as part of the Science and Society initiative. So I know you to be just a great science communicator. But only recently did I come to learn about this Art of a Scientist work and your work to bring science and art ever so close together. So I'm glad you could be on the show to talk a little bit more about that tonight.
Yeah, it's definitely been a really rewarding thing to be a part of the art exhibit and like pull these two worlds together. I, can dabble a little bit in each. And so it's like honoring different parts of who I am. And then I get to see other people experience it too, which is really fun.
Brilliant stuff. It really is. But for folks who have been tuning into Science Tonight for a little while now, you know that before we get into the really serious science, I like to have a little fun. I like to break things down a little bit. Maybe we'll laugh. Maybe I hope we don't cry. But I do like to have a little bit of fun. So, Ariana, I've put together a little bit of trivia for you. If you think that you'd like to try to go for a spot in the Science Tonight Hall of Fame.
Let's go for it. We'll see how I do. I feel like I'm always nervous and bad at trivia, but hey.
I think you're going to be great at this game. I really do. Tonight's trivia game I am calling, Is This Art? I've got 3 trivia questions. So I've got 3 trivia questions for you. And the artworks that I'll be showing you are all paintings done by animals. There'll all be multiple choice. You tell me which animal you think painted that picture. If you get 2 out of 3 correct, we'll put you in the Science Tonight Hall of Fame. Get none of them right, and you'll be entered into the Science Tonight Hall of Shame. But as we go through each one, I would also love to hear, as an art curator and a scientist, your critique of each of these as well. So
Can do.
right or wrong answer, you can thumbs up or thumbs down if it's art for each one. Let's do the first one. Here we go. Take a look at this painting.
Ooh.
Isn't that beautiful? Now, this artwork is called, hold on, I have it written down here so I could remember it. This is called Sunset Over the Adriatic. Was this done by Lolo the donkey, Benny the rabbit, or Chance the dolphin?
Oh boy. I kind of want to lean, I'm torn between B and C, partly because I feel like this is too fine motor skill for a donkey to have done. I think I'm going to go with C, dolphin. Watch me be horribly wrong.
C, Chance the dolphin. Let's see the correct answer.
I love that it was like, it can't be this one, and that's the one that it is.
You said it couldn't be Lolo the donkey, but it was Lolo the donkey. This was actually painted in 1910.
Wow.
By Lolo the donkey, apparently with a little help from Lolo's human companion, but a lot of this is Lolo. All right, let's take a look. What do you think, art or not?
I would say this is art. It has good movement to it, you know? So I would consider that art.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay. Now we can go on to the next one.
Oh boy.
All right, what do you think? Isn't this nice? Was this done by Jovian the lemur, Pinecone the owl, or Congo the chimpanzee?
Oh boy.
So you've got two primate options and a bird.
I think I might go with, boy, oh boy. I think I'm going to go with the lemur, Jovian the lemur.
We'll go with Jovian the lemur. Now, I personally knew Jovian the lemur. I do have to say, that's how Jovian ended up here. And I do know lemurs to be fairly decent artists, at least in my experience. Let's see the correct answer.
I don't think I'm right. It's going to be Pinecone the owl. Oh, it was Congo the chimpanzee.
Ooh. It was the other primate. I am so sorry. So sorry. Yeah, Congo the chimpanzee. So what do you think? Art or not?
So it's very abstract. I don't like art of this variety, but some people do. It's very, like in some ways, there is technique to splattering a canvas. It's just not my preference.
Now, fun fact about Congo the chimpanzee, Pablo Picasso owned a Congo painting. And at auction in 2005, one of these works sold for $25,000.
Wild.
Can you believe it? Can you believe it?
Wild.
All right, one more. This is your chance to stay out of the Hall of Shame for Science Tonight trivia. Let's take a look. Here you go. Last chance. Was this painted by a T-Rex at Jurassic Park, me with a rubber stamp, or by the penguin colony at the Georgia Aquarium?
Oh boy. Trying to think of what penguins' feet look like. I might go with B on this one. It might be a stamp. It's a stamp or a penguin.
It's a stamp of a penguin.
Oh, I said it's the stamp or a penguin. Okay. I'm going with
stamp or a penguin. Okay. Are you sure? Final answer.
Final answer.
Final answer. Let's see the correct answer.
I should have gone with the
penguins at the Georgia Aquarium. It was
I had
the
a moment where
penguins.
I was,
Well,
what do their feet look like? I couldn't remember what their feet looked like.
the
But
three toes. Three toes with a
yeah.
big heel. There you go, right there. Well, everybody, this has been Is This Art? With Dr. Ariana Eily.
Who's really
I
bad
actually
at guessing. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so artwork with animals, always tough. There's certainly depth and emotion there, but just perhaps not as we perceive it.
Accurate.
We'll have to bring some more science to animal artwork. Which,
Yes.
in the meantime, perhaps we should chat more about science and artwork done by people, because that's your area of expertise. I'm more than happy to change the subject. So let's get started. Tell me a little bit, and tell all of our viewers a little bit about yourself and what it is you do.
Yeah, so I am now first-year faculty at the North Carolina School of Science and Math in their biology department. And kind of the road to getting here was a little bit circuitous. Growing up, I'm one of 5 kids. We lived in a pretty rural area in Florida, and so we spent a ton of time outside. But going to school, I just loved like every subject that I took. Literature, science. At a point in time, I wanted to go into pastry and be a baker, and I was obsessed with food science. And kind of coming out of the end of undergrad or the end of high school, I kind of didn't know where I wanted to go. And my AP biology teacher, her husband worked at the college that I eventually went to. And it was really just the experience in her classroom of getting to do real experiments with materials that she brought from the labs at the college her husband worked at, that made me decide to kind of continue on and go to undergrad and do a major in biology. So I went to Rollins College. I started as a biology English dual major. And then because it's a liberal arts school, we really did get to take classes in everything. So in addition to my bio major, I did philosophy and music and sculpture and you name it. I kind of dabbled in it a little bit. And throughout it all, I knew that I loved teaching. And so teaching and science were the things that led me to doing a PhD. And then my dad's family being from North Carolina is what led me to doing that PhD at Duke. And so just kind of constantly following that thread of being passionate about teaching, being passionate about kind of science being able to be accessed by everybody, since I grew up in rural town where that wasn't the norm. And so those are kind of just things that I keep with me, along with that kind of interdisciplinary nod in everything that I do.
Well, that's excellent. I mean, I'm always interested in these sort of non-linear career paths and the way that people find interest and inspiration, particularly, right, being at a museum surrounded by scientists all the time. But so many scientists really do find inspiration outside of science so often. So, I mean, you were talking about taking humanities classes, for example, and not just sticking to that biology circuit in college.
Yeah.
Were there any other inspirational things that brought you?
Definitely. I think so when I started grad school and really ending undergrad, a friend and I made a pact that we would take. So my undergrad did these short between semester courses where you did like an intensive, and a friend and I promised each other that we would take an improv intersession course together. And because both of us were like nervous about it, but had friends that did it. And so it ended up being just so much fun. And when I started grad school up at Duke, in an effort to kind of make connections with people outside of kind of the grad school bubble, I started taking improv classes in Chapel Hill. And In a lot of ways, it really helped me as a communicator of science, kind of if I can get up on stage and make a fool of myself and make stuff up out of the top of my head, then I can get up in front of an audience of people and talk about something that I have an expertise in because I've been dedicating myself to studying this thing and do perfectly fine. And so that led me kind of, again, serendipitously to starting to teach in a course for science communication at Duke and using improv as a tool to help other scientists learn how to communicate. And so this, hobby of mine informed how I show up as a scientist and then helped me help other scientists show up as well when it came to sharing their scientists with the world. So improv was a really important kind of vehicle for helping me find my comfort with being in front of people and talking about the things that I do.
Now that's really cool. So how do these two things, I don't have a better phrase for this, take up space in your brain? Because I do, and maybe other folks do too, tend to think of science as a pursuit that lacks a lot of emotion. Mm-hmm. Yet what I understand of improv, which is very little, is that you have to be really clued into emotion in the people around you. How do those two things come together? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. The strongest improv teams are teams of people who you get to a point where you know each other so well you can anticipate what the other one is feeling, thinking, going to do. And so there is a really high emotional component to it. And I think when it comes to science, we sometimes get so stuck in that thought that science is this objective search for the truth that we forget the fact that we're human beings doing science and we're human beings with emotions. And when we run into an issue trying to do an experiment, there's an emotional response there. Sometimes the reason that we are in science, be it a loved one having cancer and that propelling us to want to do cancer research, there's an emotional attachment between us and the thing we've decided to dedicate ourselves to. And so in a way, the aspect of improv that is emotional helps in acknowledging and honoring that component of humanity within science. And then pushed further, even just beyond the scientists themselves, science is nothing if it isn't impacting the world around it in some way. And so if we aren't able to then connect that science with society, have society inform what we do in turn, then that hinders us from being able to do our job. And so that emotional aspect of improv, that ability to respond to the people that you are on stage with, becomes really important when it comes to science that is impacting society that we have to respond to. So, for example, with the pandemic and the development of treatments or vaccinations, that emotional interplay between the scientists driving the research to give us these things to help with this crisis is important in helping to build that connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes the most sense. In fact, it makes so much sense. It's hard to see why for so long science and art or science and emotion, if we were to take it that far, perhaps would not be more closely entwined. But maybe, in fact, they are. We've just been neglecting it to our detriment, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at scientific writing, for example, you are trained when you write in academic settings that you are not a part of the science that you're presenting, right? Everything is written in passive voice. Everything is written without an I mentioned or a we mentioned anywhere in there. And so it's essentially the message that the science comes first, the human comes second. And in doing that, it kind of robs us of that aspect of science that is so human, with us kind of seeking out the things that we do. And when it even comes to asking the research questions that we ask, us designing those questions is oftentimes based on our human curiosity, our human experience, our response to current human needs. And so it's there, but I think it gets hidden because of this want to avoid science seeming subjective. And whenever we think of subjective, we think, oh, that's when humans are kind of injecting themselves into this, and it'll compromise the integrity of science, or it'll compromise the truth that science will give us. And I think we have to have both. Just because you are acknowledging the human components of science, the emotional side of the people doing science, doesn't mean you're losing the objectivity of the method by which science operates and science works. Those two work together. So sometimes, and when I'm talking to my students, I like to consider it in science with capital S science of human beings doing science and participating in a scientific enterprise, and then science, lowercase s science, which is the method that we use to come up with research questions, design experiments, evaluate the data, and consider what that data might mean, and follow that thread. And so we have two types of science, and one's objectivity isn't going to be sacrificed when we acknowledge the people that are participating in the system of science.
I love that. That's brilliant. Somebody should put that on a motivational poster. Make some art out of that, somebody. If you're just tuning in, thanks for being here. I'm talking with Dr. Ariana Eily, faculty at North Carolina School of Science and Math, about bringing science and art together, two sides of the same coin. So, Ariana, take me back a little bit. How do you see, or how did you see, this artistic side in your own PhD research?
Yeah, so in being a PhD student and in being a researcher, for me, the artistic side came out in how I presented my work. So whether that was the style by which I crafted the story that I told, or the way that I pulled my slides together, but really in my PhD work, my own research, it came at a time when I was starting to publish papers on my own work. And I hit a point where, because what we were doing was so new, and the most recent models, images, etc., for the system that I worked on were decades old, I was sitting in a position where I got to recreate what those models looked like. And so having the chance to kind of draw out these new models so I studied this teeny tiny aquatic plant and the bacteria that lives in its leaves and how they communicate with one another, the irony of also being a science communicator. And so I got to figure out a way to redraw those models to tell a better story and make it more understandable. And so that became a really neat way of expressing my artistic side in the science that I do. And similarly, even, earlier on in being a student, when I was preparing for my qualifying exams, the way that I take notes, so I always use unlined paper when I take notes, and I have lots of different colored pens, and I draw as I'm taking notes to help me understand the information that I'm consuming. And so there's always kind of that thread of art that's in everything that I do. I still do stuff like that now when I'm taking notes or if I'm sitting through a talk. And so it definitely shows up in those ways, as well as showing up in the ways that I present my work, talk through my work, sometimes even in like the kind of very purposeful body movements that I use. There are elements of I am picturing in my head the image I'm trying to create for my listener while I'm sharing the things that I'm sharing.
Scientists who doodle.
Yes.
I wish I could take notes on unlined paper. I end up with that like curling down as I write, every line just sort of takes off and I lose track. Perhaps if I had spent more time in art class and in some of those humanities classes, I could take better notes. But that's a brilliant method.
Yeah.
I mean, to incorporate basically all of the senses in how you interpret information beyond just the words on the page, the imagery and the words all together. But tell me a little bit about how you've been working to bring scientists and artists together. Tell us a little bit about Art of a Scientist.
Absolutely. So the Art of a Scientist started, so when I was a grad student, we had a student group, which really was a space where we could all get together and talk about science and how science intersected with society in ways that we weren't able to do in our like independent research. And as we were doing stuff through this group, we started to kind of incorporate more things that we wanted to do to kind of have this group of students be able to share science outside of just Duke. And so we had an outreach committee and we had a science communication committee, which me and then two other grad students, Hannah Devins, who's still at Duke, and then Casey Lindbergh, who graduated recently. And we started coming up with ideas for how to bring science communication into this space for graduate students, and then also create spaces where they got to share their work with the world outside of Duke, and the public got to experience that work too. And so we did various kind of outreach things. We did some outreach events at schools and some at bars as well. And we were sitting down having a planning meeting, and through a misunderstanding that somebody had about the Durham Art Walk and like wanting to recreate something like that for scientists, the idea of doing something like that but having scientists and artists paired together was thrown on the board of potential things for us to do. And none of us had ever done anything like pulling together an art exhibit before. None of us even knew where to start. And this was very much our just kind of pie in the sky idea of what if this was possible. And so through just kind of connections that I had, a woman who actually worked at the yoga studio I used to go to, used to be a part owner in an art gallery in Durham. And so I contacted her to ask her questions about like, how do you do this? And that just got us on a chain of talking to different folks in the art world through Durham, and then led us to connecting with folks in the art sphere at Duke. And once we had gallery space from them, we were like, I guess this is feasible for us to start pulling together people to participate in this exhibit. And so we did calls for scientists of students at Duke that we submitted through Duke's newsletters and all the departments that we had contacts to. Similarly, we did calls for local artists and went through all of the channels we could think of for kind of touching base with the local art community. And we didn't think we would get responses with this being like the first go round, but we were really surprised and grateful for like the people who wanted to be a part of it and were excited to be a part of it. And so we had our scientists submit their images of the work that they had done, and then we sent those images to our artists and had them pick the one that they wanted to work with. And we had each write like a little like piece description that we put on the gallery walls next to the pieces, where we had our science piece next to our artistic piece. And then we had our opening night, where again, we had this moment where the night before we had pieces that were just sitting on the ground in the art gallery, and then we got them all up on the wall. And then the night that we opened, we were like, what if no one comes? But the room was just filled with people who were excited to be there, artists and scientists who like had formed these really awesome like friendships through working together, and were really curious to see how like the pieces came out. And then their communities all came through as well. And so it just created this really beautiful environment. And so, you know, after that first run of the exhibit, we decided to keep it going, and we got a lot of momentum and a lot of attention, much more than we anticipated, which we were really grateful for. And that's kind of what gave us the push to keep going. So we're entering our 3rd year since last year's exhibit got postponed because of the pandemic. So this would be our 4th, but it's only our 3rd gallery or exhibit.
And it all started with a misunderstanding.
Yep, it did indeed. Happy accidents, right?
Yeah, just the best accident. So at that first showing, then, can you tell us a little bit about what some of the art pieces were like? What were some of the research projects? How did the art go along with that? What did people get to experience?
Yeah, we've had such amazing pieces throughout the exhibits that we've had so far. And in that first one, we had, so I'm trying to like picture the gallery in my head and like move through it. We had a scientist who studied sex determination. So how an organism chooses with this spectrum from male to female, where to develop along that spectrum. And he was paired with a woman who did traditional Indian dance. And she was so intentional about her choreography to capture all of the minute details of the different cellular signals that are going on to make that determination. And it ended up being this beautiful dance that we had initially hoped to have space to actually have her perform, but she did a recording of it. And the micrographs of his work were stationed side by side with a video of her dance going, which was just awesome. We also have a scientist who studies sea urchins and their sight organs, so how they seed and navigate their environment. And she worked with an artist who worked in chalk and photography. And so the scientist has a algorithm that they can kind of put in the parameters of the sight organ for an organism they're interested in, and it will create an approximation of how that organism sees. And so the artist went to Duke Forest and took a series of photographs, and then with the help of the scientist, reconfigured those photographs as how a sea urchin would see, and then created a piece that mimicked how that sea urchin's eye organ is constructed, and drew the image of like what Duke Forest would look like if you were a sea urchin plunked in the middle of it, which is just such a like awesome thing that like you could never experience how another organism is seeing the world. But the work between the scientist and this artist put you in that position where here was this thing you're familiar with, and this is if you were this other organism entirely, what it would feel like to you. So that one's by far is still one of my all-time favorite pieces that we've had at the exhibit.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, right. The best art, so I'm told, sort of takes you out of your own experience and gets you into somebody else's experience. But to expand that into a sea urchin's experience, and a sea urchin's experience not in the water, but in Durham, North Carolina, of all places. I mean, yeah, I can I go see that one somewhere? Can I still experience this?
So
Is there a way?
do have images from that first gallery that I can send for you to put up so that people can see what that looked like. It's even the way that it's like positioned on the wall is really gorgeous. So I can send those along.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Just for me. I'm gonna hoard them. I'm not gonna share them. They're just for me. No, I'm kidding, everybody. I'm kidding. Don't yell at me in the chat box. I'll remind everybody who's tuned in watching right now, drop questions and thoughts and comments into the chat and into the comments if you're watching on Facebook. I'm going to turn to those in just a moment and get your thoughts, reflections, and your questions for Dr. Eily from there in just a moment. It looks like there's already some good conversation happening over there, so I'm excited to get to that in just a moment. Ariana, what is the most rewarding part of bringing scientists and artists together? And on the flip side, what's maybe the most difficult part?
Yeah. So from the rewarding side of things, I think one of the things that I enjoyed most was seeing the relationships between our scientists and artists that developed. We had one pair of artists and scientists who became like best friends, and then they and their wives would like go out and do stuff together. And so there was just this almost moment of recognition that these two disciplines do have so much in common, that was really unifying between them. And it showed in like the people who have been a part of the exhibit, and then also the increase in folks who have wanted to be a part of it moving forward. So in that first kind of opening night, the number of scientists in the room who were like, oh, I should have submitted something to this, and who were really excited about submitting the next time, you know, submissions opened for another round of the exhibit. It was just really, really satisfying to see that acknowledgement that these two things really do go together well. And belong together and enhance our experience and understanding of science. And they give us a different avenue through which to express ourselves as scientists, to express ourselves as artists using scientific, you know, content and concepts. But it gives us this kind of deeper understanding of how some of these things work and what they mean. And so from that aspect of both how it's unified the people in some ways, and also how it's just kind of unified the importance of those fields being together, I think has been really, really rewarding. And I can remember, so we try to do family days at our exhibits where we have interactive stuff for folks to bring, you know, their kids to, or even, you know, folks without kids to come and kind of experience and interact with the exhibit. And the first year that we did the exhibit, we did an activity on 3D printing. And so, you know, folks were able to come in and figure out how to 3D print things. And we had a little boy who came through, and he was obsessed with marine biology, just obsessed with it. Like, his mom was like, he would rather watch Blue Planet or live feeds from aquariums than like Finding Nemo. Like, he doesn't want the cartoon, like, sea animals. He wants the real thing, right? He was spectacular. And then he started showing us drawings, and he was probably 4-ish, like very young. And so he asked his mom if he could show us drawings that he had made of some of his favorite sea animals. And she was like, the moment he starts this, he's not going to stop. And so he opens her phone and is showing us these drawings. And like, you know, you expect 4-year-old drawings, but they're as if a marine biologist had sat down and started making drawings of these organisms for the purpose of like identifying them later. They were that good. And
oh, wow.
It was really, yeah, it was stunning, like absolutely stunning. And it was really like, I go back to that moment because I know that there is so often a point in time where as kids are going through school, they are told that they have to choose one or the other. Like, art can be a side project if you want to be a scientist, or science can be something that you dabble in if you want to be an artist. But if you're a serious artist, then you won't do blah. Or if you're a serious scientist, you won't do blah. And having this exhibit and having the space where these two things are shown merged together creates a space where kids like that don't have to choose one or the other, and they get to say, like, actually, I get to do both. I can continue doing both, and the fact that I'm able to do both helps me be better at them. And so that was just a really just important, I think, moment for me, both as you know, a person who started that exhibit, but then also as a teacher and how I approach my class and the ways that I let my students explore and express themselves and the things that they know and understand. And just like encouraging them that like those two halves of themselves are important, and they do work in synergy with one another. And so that part, I think, is really, really satisfying to me of starting this exhibit and continuing to work in ways that merge these disciplines together. I think on the flip side, when it comes to the things that are challenging or difficult, there are a couple of things. One being the just like working against that perceived hierarchy of like one being better than the other, and kind of dealing with people's like preconceived notions of how these things should work. For example, like being able to get money to help artists because they are creating pieces and using their own money to do so. And arts get far less funding than the sciences do. And so that dollar evaluation sometimes leads to us perceiving one thing as less important than the other. So that can sometimes be a challenge, and just kind of finding ways to have really concrete conversations to address that, I think, is important. I think the second thing is both artists and scientists can be very particular about how things go and their crafts. And so sometimes helping navigate those relationships when you're pulling them together, is really...
I'm like, I work with scientists.
yeah. So that can definitely be difficult, because there can be some personality clash that goes on there. And then the last thing that kind of can sometimes lead to that is that the languages in art and science are very different. And like even in the type of art you do or the type of science that you do, the language that you use to discuss that thing is different. And so sometimes there can be a barrier to dialogue because we haven't taken that step to like be like, we're coming from different like backgrounds. We use different terminology to mean different things. And so where can we kind of come together and like share knowledge so that we can have an effective collaboration with one another? And so sometimes those things like the difference in value that we see in art and science, the fact that scientists and artists can be very particular about how they do what they do, and we have this language barrier, can sometimes make it difficult for everybody who's involved in that collaboration to feel fully supported or appreciated in that like context. And so finding ways to kind of navigate that and help the folks who are a part of the exhibit navigate that, I think is something that we'll continue to work on as the exhibit goes on to smooth that out, because it's a little rocky at moments.
Well, I love all of that. Like even with rocky moments, the bringing artists and scientists together and tackling some of those challenges, and then putting on these great exhibits for people to come and experience. I mean, that you would have a 4-year-old come up and be like, I have to show you all of my science drawings. Like that means so much when it comes to creating something that allows the most people possible to access science. I feel like art, I think, is put on a pedestal as one thing, and science is put on a pedestal as another thing. But if a kid's got no problem running into a gallery, looking around and then saying, oh, you know what? These people would love to see the thing that I'm passionate about too. Like that's got to speak volumes to doing exactly what you said, which was activating both sides of the brain, or not both sides of the brain, but both parts of a person to encourage learning if they're students and engagement across science and math and technology and the arts.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's I get choked up like talking about that aspect because of the fact that it can be so empowering for people, and like it's giving you access to things that sometimes you don't have access to, and like it's giving you a means to have like ownership and like engage with and understand and bring your own experiences and understanding to that thing, which I think is really empowering for folks. And you know, when it comes to science, and I mentioned this before, how science really isn't anything if it isn't connected to society and responding to society's needs and being really in touch with that. And access to science can be so limited in so many different ways. And so I think for me, a big part of this exhibit and a big part of why I continue to do things that merge disciplines is, can we increase the access points for people to be a part of this process, to ask questions, to share the things that they're seeing or their own experiences, to see themselves being a part of these fields, moving forwards. And that sort of empowerment is how we get more people to be a part of it, and how we make science better too. And so that part of it is really near and dear to my heart. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Just brilliant stuff. All right. Let me turn over to the chat and see what's happening over here. Our first question for you comes from Eric. I know Eric. Hey, Eric, thanks for watching. Eric is an artist who's worked with scientists for decades. Eric says, I think that the two disciplines share a lot, especially spontaneity. I'd be interested to hear what Dr. Eily thinks about spontaneity.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So because we go through themes for the Art of a Scientist exhibit, and sometimes we're like, it could be cool to do a theme where we choose a word that can mean different things in each of the disciplines, and then just see what comes out of that. But I think so many big moments or aha moments are in that time where you get a result that's unexpected, or you try something and you think it's going to go one way, but it ends up going a different way. And rather than being that's not going according to plan, scrap it and move on, you ask that question of let's see where this goes. And then it can lead to all sorts of really interesting and fascinating things. And the exploration that comes from that spontaneity, I think, is really important to discovery. And discovery is something that's important for both science and for the arts. So I'm thinking very freeform jazz, or, things along those lines, or, you find those moments through that willingness to be spontaneous and take a risk and do something.
Anna asks, do you have any advice on how to have the scientific facts keep its credibility when expressed through art?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up a lot, this question of how do you refrain from losing the integrity of the science when you have expression through art? And I think the thing is that the science doesn't go away just because you have done an artistic rendering of something. And sometimes it's similar to when you're communicating science through story. The facts of that science, the underlying foundation, don't go away because you have told a story for people to access it. And one of the reasons why in the exhibit we have the science and the art side by side with one another with those descriptions is that sometimes that art's going to be an entry point for people. And once they have that entry point, they can now work on absorbing the science that's there. And if you didn't have that art there at all, then that science standing all on its own becomes a barrier that they can't necessarily get through. And so by having them there in collaboration with one another, you've provided an entry so that people can understand the facts. And so I think similar to, say, how papers have graphical abstracts now, or different journals choose their cover art very strategically to highlight or show a part of the science they want people to dig into. And so giving people that artistic entry point, and if you can also help them understand what's the thing of this science that I want you to leave with, it can give them that foray when you do then show them the scientific facts. So having them together, having them side by side, I think is really important for getting there, if that makes sense. Excellent question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see here. Marie writes, visited Green Swamp in Brunswick City, experienced Venus flytrap and pitcher plants up close. Breathtaking, got several great picks, art and science. Have you ever experienced carnivorous plants in southeastern North Carolina?
So I have, yes. The answer to that question is yes. I got excited because my undergrad research was on carnivorous pitcher plants. And so I spent in my senior year of undergrad, me and my advisor worked on figuring out how they make the digestive enzymes they use to eat their food. And so lots of experiments tinkering with pitcher plants to try and figure that out. Had a funny instance where we were getting issues with being able to see what we were looking for in our pitcher plant tissue because we kept getting all of this fluorescence of different colors from the tissue itself. Couldn't figure out why, had no idea why. And after I started grad school and, left that troubleshooting project behind, a paper came out that revealed that pitcher plants actually produce things that fluoresce pretty colors to attract prey that they can eat. And so my advisor and I were seeing a real natural phenomenon in our pitcher plants. We just didn't know it yet. So pitcher plants are always something that is near and dear to me. Yep.
How
They're
about
awesome.
that? There you go, Marie. What a story. Oh, that's okay. Now I'm going to have you back on to talk about pitcher plants and your PhD plants and biology there. Okay. Let's see. We got a few minutes left in the show. You'll have to have you back to talk plants. I haven't talked plants on Science Tonight with anybody yet, so we'll have to book you back on the show. I was thinking about something. You talked about using the art as an access point into the science, and creating access points for lots of different people to be able to get into science and art, and then for people to realize that they're not two distinct things. You don't necessarily have to choose one or the other, that you can activate both parts of yourself in that way. And since I know that this is a cause of yours as well, I wanted to make sure I asked about it. How does this work for getting underrepresented communities of people in sciences?
Yeah. It's a really important question, especially when we think about how there can be barriers to access for either the arts or the sciences for underrepresented communities. And I think in part, this really comes to how we think about things in the classroom and giving students different ways of interacting with knowledge, in producing knowledge, and in reflecting on and seeing their own knowledge. And I think that can be really empowering and important for students to see, because I think sometimes it can be frustrating or difficult, or we can have this really narrow box for what we think a particular type of knowledge is. And if you fall outside of that box, you're like, oh, I guess I can't do that. And so by broadening what we're looking at when it comes to scientific knowledge, I'll stick there because that's more predominantly my realm. When you're giving students an option to access different parts of their brain and toy with and mold that knowledge and develop that knowledge, it helps activate things in them that maybe traditional means of evaluating that aren't giving them. And so that sense of empowerment of, for my younger brother, for example, he is really good with like shapes and numbers. And so he's a synesthete, so he blends senses. And he has a very particular relationship with those things in how he visualizes shapes in space. That made organic chemistry for him like poetic in a sense. And having the space where he actually got to employ those things made a really huge difference in how he actually engaged with that discipline. And so by doing those things and expanding those bounds, you're able to activate students' knowledge that they already have. There are ways that they are already thinking about and interacting with the world. And now you're giving them a hook to use that to understand science. And once they've got that, and they can see that they can like do science and use those skills, and those skills don't exclude them from being able to do that, then it's a really important step for their ability to continue to gain scientific knowledge, their ability to share scientific knowledge with their communities, their ability to, you know, continue to participate in capital S science and make changes and ask questions that are going to be important for their communities. It can also lift voices of communities that we don't hear from enough and make us aware that as we are thinking about our science or doing our science, we need to pay attention to them. So this summer, I'll be working with Jeff Ward, who is a law professor at Duke, and we're focusing on artificial intelligence, and we're using art as a means to hear the perspectives from underrepresented minority communities with this new technology that's going to, you know, continue impacting our world. And so it creates a space for those voices to be shared and heard, and then pulled into science as a process, which is really important. I could talk about that stuff forever.
I will. Yeah, right. Oh my gosh, we've got another hour's worth of conversation to have just about that now. Oh my. Okay, so now you have to come back on for plants, and then we'll come back on to talk about your Duke Law collaboration. All right, this is fantastic. All right, I know that there is a new Art of the Scientist exhibit that's going to be showing soon. Give us the details on that one.
Yeah, so last year we had our third exhibit, but it got pushed back because of the pandemic. We were hosted by the Power Plant Gallery this year, and so to make sure that we are safe, we're doing an online virtual exhibit. So you'll be able to find it on the Power Plant Gallery's website. And it opens March 11th, so just a couple weeks from now. Our theme for this year was Bridging the Gap, which spans so many different aspects of both art and science. And we also did a collaboration with the School of Science and Math with their art and science communicator students. So they'll have pieces that are a part of the exhibit too. And so we're really excited to be able to bring this exhibit even in a time like we're in right now. So for folks who are interested, you can check out the Power Plant Gallery's website March 11th, and our digital gallery will be up.
There you go, everybody. Something to look forward to for the month of March.
For sure.
I did put the website for Art of a Scientist in the chat on YouTube, everybody. So it's right there, artofascientist.org. And I think folks can follow Art of a Scientist on social media as well with @ArtOfAScientist. Ariana, is that right?
Yep, you got it.
Okay, perfect. There you go. So everybody put that one on your calendars and get ready for that one. I know I'll be checking it out. So maybe I'll see you there in the digital space. I'll wave at everybody on our way into the digital doorway on March 11th. Dr. Eily, Ariana, thank you for being on Science Tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Fabulous conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And I always love talking about this stuff because it's stuff that I'm really passionate about, and it informs everything that I do. So happy to be here and happy to share it.
And thanks to everybody for tuning in to tonight's edition of Science Tonight. I hope that you'll join me again next Thursday and every Thursday for our live program. Join us here on the museum's YouTube channel or Facebook page. Either place, you can join the conversation, learn something new, meet interesting people, play fun trivia at the beginning. I don't know. We try to have a good time with the show. Brought to you by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Now, again, next week we'll be talking with NC State paleontologist Evan Jevnikar. We'll be talking about some of the biggest dinosaurs that roamed, at least the biggest carnivores, T-Rex and its relatives. So don't miss that one. Go ahead, mark your calendars. Check out naturalsciences.org to get all the information about that program and the rest of the Science Tonight events for March. You can also follow the museum on social media. We're at Natural Sciences on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But there's a real simple way to make sure that you don't miss a single episode or any real cool content coming out of the museum for that matter. If you're watching on YouTube right now, there's a subscribe button down below. You can click subscribe, and then you can ring the bell to get notified, and then you will know as soon as we go live with the next great thing coming out of the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Until next time, everybody, take care, stay safe, keep your community safe, and we'll see you again soon. Good night, everybody.